everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the Tufts University China-US Symposium. My name is Rithwik. I'm a sophomore here, and I organized this panel, and I'll be moderating it today. So a lot of the tensions between China, its neighbors, and the great powers can be traced to a trust deficit, and because when actors question their counterparts' intents, the resulting perceptions they form of each other can lead to escalatory rhetoric and policy. So this panel hopes to address some of the surface-level sources of mistrust across a broad scope of actors, the thinking that underpins these sources, and ways to address them. So our first panelist today is Professor Joachim Maitre. He's a professor of international relations and journalism at Boston University. He's served in a variety of academic and journalist positions in North America, Europe, and Africa. He's been a lecturer for the University of Nigeria, a foreign correspondent and editor for devolve, chairman and associate professor of German at McGill University, a press and Olympic attaché for the Olympic Games of 1976, and the editor-in-chief of Die Welt am Sonntag, the Axel Springer Verlag, and the Ulstein Buchverlag. He's a specialist both in security affairs and in reporting on security affairs, and teaches in the College of Communications Department of Journalism as well as in the Department of International Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Hari. When you pressed me for a topic, I had to make one up, and I send you the following topic, which I hope you liked. A slow boat from China, aircraft carriers in the new threat scenario. It indicates that the first aircraft carrier in China, with China, will take a long time to cross the Pacific, providing the Chinese have a plan of crossing the Pacific and threaten Los Angeles and Seattle and the entire West Coast, because we Americans have a fascination with threat scenarios. We really prosper under threats. And right now, the newest fashion is the Chinese are arming up, and they will threaten our interest in the Pacific Ocean. Sorry for that. Just yell when you cannot hear me. I got an ad just yesterday, an event for which I do not beat the drum. The Boston Council on Foreign Affairs is offering the following event in about 3 days' time. The Future of Maritime Security in the Pacific. Speech and discussion will be guided by Toshi Yoshihara, PhD, Chair of Asia Pacific Studies and Professor of Strategy, U.S. Naval War College. The introductory paragraph: in the wake of the deployment of its first aircraft carrier, what do China's maritime ambitions mean for the Asia-Pacific region? How do its neighbors, its neighbor countries, view these activities? And what do they pretend for the United States' strategic pivot to Asia? My main question here would be, what do we know about the Chinese intentions in the Pacific and in their even smaller region, coastal areas of China? The answer, of course, is we don't know. But glancing through papers I had stored away, I found one particular article. It's a master's paper by a former student of mine, Luke Hartig. Is China a threat to U.S. national security? An analysis of current challenges China represents to the United States. So we are not breaking new ground altogether. The student, Luke Hartig, receiving his degree from Boston University in 2001, joined the Peace Corps and spent 3 very successful years in the highlands of Guatemala, helping the Indians to build buildings and ovens and similar items. He then disappeared with a graduate degree from Chicago, University of Chicago, and I only heard once from him through email. In connection with China and China's relationship with us, the United States, I found an article just about a week ago in the Wall Street Journal. Headline, General expects Marine Corps to shrink due to sequester. So as the Chinese represent a threat to our national security interest, we built down from 200,000 Marine Corps infantry and Marines. We will build down to 182,000 within 3 years. That should be seen as quite sensational, because they are crucial land forces for us. Of course, amphibious forces, a vital part for the United States Navy. Let's just think about that. Because the Chinese return to the international world of power politics are poorly equipped for direct encounter with America unless we were to talk about a land war. And we all remember the American general who said, we should never, ever, after Korea, engage in a land conflict with China. But as you all remember, we did, just not very long ago. I would like to focus on the structure, manpower, and equipment of the American armed forces and the threat they operate under, a threat being primarily financial. We have the U.S. Army, in short USA, the United States Air Force, USAF, the U.S. Navy, USN, and their affiliate substructure, manpower service, the Marine Corps. And our armed forces, it can be stated safely, are pretty wrong for a future encounter in the Far East. Practical. Our army has about 500,000 people under arms, the majority of which, of course, are not in combat functions. We still have a relationship between combat forces and combat support and support forces 1:8. During the Vietnam conflict as of 1965, we had a ratio even higher than that, and as you know, we did not do very well with that imbalance. The U.S. Air Force is right now headed for the procurement of in excess of 3,000 F-35 tactical aircraft to be shared by the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Air Force. And we all know by now, by reading daily and weekly papers, that this aircraft has gone wrong because we are overly ambitious. It's a single aircraft fighter, single seat, and is to replace a miraculous, similar single engine, single pilot fighter, the F-16. Why we are already planning to abolish this aircraft is known to no one. Anyway, there's a particular pressure by the defense industry, by Congress, and some four-stars within the Air Force to say that aircraft is old, if not too old. We have just finished a program of modernization for the A-10, which is an anti-tank aircraft, not high-tech, but very effective in the most recent conflicts in the Middle East. And we will now rely for a super-fast fighter aircraft called the F-22 wherever in the world it has a true, remarkable, and convincing function. I tend to ask my class, it's a graduate class, taking a course in defense technology and defense planning, to consider themselves under threat from the Pentagon to plan for the abolition of one of the services. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps. I mean, abolish it. There's no money. We are in a deep, deep hole with our financing of the armed services. and they should come up in writing on 3 pages with a plan to abolish one of them. Not modify it, but abolish it. Let's remember that our Air Force has a number of aircraft which are fairly modern and without which the Air Force aircraft, C-5, C-17, we couldn't fly anybody into Saudi Arabia or Jordan or wherever we will be allowed to be with troops in the near future. We have sufficient fighter aircraft, but the one that can provide to the Army or Marine Corps close air support, called CAS, we are about to abolish. The A-10 has just been modernized in that they all received, at a cost of $2.5 million, a glass cockpit, which means digital. And we already say that aircraft will have to go. The Air Force, owning it, running it, is not impressed by the aircraft because it's not glamorous. Pilots like it in a way, but also would not wish to be assigned to that kind of an anti-tank and anti-fortress houses aircraft. The Navy has an army called the Marine Corps and has an Air Force. It's called Marine Aviation and Navy Aviation, and also wish to play with this concept. But we also know that the Navy is the only service we have which we need vitally for the defense of the continental United States and Hawaii, and now also Guam, the little island in the Mariana Islands, which receives thousands of new troops because they have been or will be driven out of Okinawa in Japan and the like. The Marine Corps has tanks, very modern tank, the M1A3 with a 120 millimeter gun, and can provide the service that so far the Army requires. However, the answer is most of the time from the students who know a bit by now about the need for particular services by suggesting the Air Force can go. So no C-5s, no C-17s any longer, and the answer given in addition to suggesting that the Air Force be abolished is, well, the Navy has ships and has aircraft as well, so they can provide with this service. Well, clearly, a ship takes a bit longer than a jet aircraft. The Marine Corps, which is in all likelihood the best fighting force we have for land functions and purposes, is the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps could take over, and I'm not fantasizing, could take over functions from the Army, and we would save a lot of money and would not be tempted to answer military threats of any kind anywhere abroad by sending in the Army. And the answer, of course, is the Army is the only expendable service that we have. We would, of course, suffer in a way because we would have less manpower. But in the center of our discussion in all likelihood today will be we can no longer afford the services we have. We are, sorry, I'm not saying we are broke because we are not. We are insolvent, which is much more critical, and that's why we have sequestration. The armed services themselves have learned and are in the midst of a discussion which is aiming at a different structured armed force in general. We have not done very well, mildly put, in a major war in 2003 and after that. By invading Iraq, our declared aim, this is the President, had been to find and destroy weapons of mass destruction. 2, to punish Iraq for having hosted Al-Qaeda and for having met one of the main players in the attack, Mohammed Atta. And thirdly, to introduce and cement into the government structure of Iraq the democracy. In a brief abbreviation of our aim, we called it draining the swamp. The government of Saddam Hussein, main troops being Sunni, is now replaced by a government by Shia, an ally of Iran. Many things apparently have gone very wrong, and for that reason our reputation in the world has suffered badly, primarily after the rejection of France, Chirac, Germany, Schroeder, and President Putin of Russia. So what now? We have to do replanning, and I just, in preparing for the end of the 15 minutes, in about 5 minutes, I will talk about that aspect. Namely, most recently, a prestigious journal published in America, published in Washington, called Foreign Affairs, a professor of international relations and strategic affairs, Barry Posen from MIT, wrote a sensational article in Foreign Affairs, January-February issue, said, pull back and stop our activist foreign policy in the world. It's a major invitation, and we do at our own risk kind of ignoring, which tends to be popular amongst university professors, which means he doesn't understand. It's always important to accuse anyone representing a different opinion of ignorance. And he wrote and offered to us a very practical article which you should all by heart. If you had learned in school to learn poems by heart, that would be a very serious invitation. The discussion is also starting, of course, in the press, primarily under the headline, "We can no longer afford it." You're familiar with our defense budget. It is not known. It is not audited. We don't really know how it is being spent. A lot disappears in the dark channels. Our defense budget is somewhere in the area of $850 billion per year. You say, oh, billion. We now count in trillions. So this cannot be all that serious. We'll find the money somehow. Let me just give a brief explanation, because there is a lack again in educated Americans of being able to define the term grand strategy. Do we have one after Iraq and after Afghanistan? What is a grand strategy as compared to a strategy which every country, every nation, every government must have, which in the case of a non-superpower, Switzerland, would be to make good chocolate and have all the tourists come and buy chocolate and enjoy our mountains. A grand strategy is an overall design for action to react in harmony and with a sense of realism in economics, cultural, and in political terms. Act properly and rationally towards any possible threat. And here I would like to concentrate very briefly only on our most recent military experience, which you will all know under the cliché of General Petraeus in Afghanistan. As you know, he was the editor-in-chief and mastermind behind a manual, namely the so-called Iraq Search in 2006-7. It is accepted by the general educated public in general that today we can say the war in Iraq was turned around into something resembling a victory by measures taken by the armed forces and Marine Corps, which defeated an enemy which had gone from conventional war 2003 to a coin, or rather counterinsurgency, inviting counterinsurgency from the American troops. We did engage in 2007. It's called the ethnic cleansing of Baghdad, where Sunnis were killed in fairly large numbers, 3,000 a week, to drive the Sunnis out of Baghdad, and in turn, in the province, primarily one entirely populated by Sunnis, we had bought the loyalty of the Sunni population. Here again, you will say, being modern people, give me the data. Well, we spent $365 million per year for buying the loyalty of the sheiks, and it worked. Both measures, ethnic cleansing, not under that name, and buying the loyalty by spending money heavily, are not mentioned anywhere in the manual of counterinsurgency warfare, designed by Petraeus. Just some little bit of food for thought, but think about it, this was not an honest enterprise, and in the land forces, Army, and Marine Corps, we no longer use that manual, which had been clicked under the new technology by about 2 million people in the United States. What I'm attempting to hint at is a degree of deception we're not used to. We have done it in a different way. Now, following Afghanistan and the application of coin/search technology in Afghanistan, I see an article in a publication which is actually read primarily by officers, Armed Forces Journal. Current issue, which is March, April, where it says, let's not try that again. Why you can't win someone else's counterinsurgency. Afghanistan, where the Taliban has actually withdrawn from the battle zone by not appearing anywhere during the day and taking over the night, fighting American forces. Our decision has been made. When I say our, I'm not a member of the Obama administration. We will withdraw all combat forces from Afghanistan by 2014. In a way, of course, you may claim given up. China is following this development with great interest because it indicates to what extent America is already withdrawing from the world scene, playing the role as unipolar power, the world's only superpower, which started to click with the end of the Soviet Union in 2001. America will assume a new role. It will be a part of a multipolar power scene on the global level, I predict. And with that perhaps irresponsible prediction, I will stop.
I'll use a clip on that.